Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Rudolph Mrazek, the author of Engineers of Happy Land, Technology and Nationalism in a Colony. Welcome to Rip Rap, Rudolph.
Thank you.
We've been planning this interview for a while. You've been back in Prague and then you've just gotten back. But one of the things that fascinated me in your acknowledgement section of the book is you talk about the community of scholars and the resources you used for research, including the archives in both the Netherlands and Indonesia, and then your thorough investigation of public and private statements. I personally think it's always important for young scholars to hear how a project like yours begins to emerge and then the amount of work that it takes to fulfill its requirements. Maybe you'd like to share a little bit of that with us.
It may be important for old scholars too, like young scholars. And community of scholars, I now, as you said, I realize I said community of scholars. There is a lot of scholars in the field of Indonesia, hundreds. And of course I'm grateful to all of them, exchanging emails and being at conferences and so on. But the community, I mean something else. This is something that happens to you. You don't choose it. As you know, I'm from Prague. You know it from my accent and everything. And I was in the United States for the first time in 1969 for very short time. And then I went back. I met some people. And I decided to go back. I did not want to emigrate, and then they did not let me to emigrate. So I was there, and they were here. And they were coming. They were bringing a lot of reading, but especially the others were coming. And it was, you may say it was kind of sentimental imperialism, you know, they coming in shining vehicles, bringing books, and I was reading them and being grateful, but it was early 70s. And it was, you know, curtain was coming down on the 60s. And they were as much disturbed about the world as I was. And it was another September 11th, the Allende September 11th. And we were sitting together at very small tables and talking about Indonesia. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about Indonesia, but I learned much more about relation of scholarly and personal. I realized that actually there is no difference between trying to understand some other country and some other scholars and ourselves. And so it was my method. It became my method, for better or worse. And actually when I think why I am writing now, I'm writing to stay with these people and to be with them. So this is the community of scholars. It's not a very scholarly answer, but it's a very deeply personal feeling about scholarship and personal thing. I'm talking too long maybe about community, but you ask about the archives and the sources and so on. Again, there is not much scholarship, I think, on the first look in that. There are, I studied, you know, this is 1870s to 1942. So you have a lot of written sources. And you have Dutch archives and you have Indonesian archives. And Dutch archives are dusted, clean, very shiny, organized, like ABCD and chronologically organized. And they are quite nasty by that, because there is an order, and that is very oppressive, because it's telling you should take our order. This is how history really is. And there are Indonesian archives. It's almost a neo-colonial stereotype. I know people talk about that. It's humid, it's warm, there is more cockroaches than you know, people who are helping you with the archives. These are heaps of humid thing, but the physicality of that is actually in many ways liberating, because you know this is thing which is living, and actually there is some sort of freedom in that, because the order is not given. There is not that strict linear order of organized Dutch archives. So again, it was a very personal thing. I was walking through the Indonesian archives like you walk through forest. It was not, again, it was not quite sure of scholarly selection at the beginning. I was just walking and picking things that woke my interest and that seems to be beautiful or ugly or especially noticeable. So these are the archives. The people. Should I still about the people? It's again. It's good. The period is quite good for that kind of work I was doing, because, as I said, it was up to 1942. I was born in 1942, which means there were many people of my father, of my grandfather, grandmother generations. I could still talk about that in Indonesia, and again, it was quite personal experience. Sometimes not so easy as one may expect in Indonesia, colonial country, and so on, because I was interviewing city people, educated people, people who got in touch with new technologies, which means people who even have computers and they have read something, and it made the interviewing and talking with these people quite hard. There was something technological in that. They were like ready-made for me. They knew about, I'm an American professor, I'm coming, and they knew what I'm coming from and what I'm coming for, and they decided they will give it to me. And so it was, as I very often say to friends, it was like tape recorder. You push the button and they started to tell you the stories. It was very depressing because this is not what you need. So you had to push them out of balance. You have to tease them out. You have to make them giggle. You have to make them uncertain, not to be like the machine. And it was at the end very beautiful because I was teasing them. They were teasing me. And there was some sort of rapport, and in best cases there was even friendship. So as I said about the friends, about these scholars friends, I'm writing because I would like to stay with them. I'm writing about these people because also in a way I want to stay with them. So it's a very personal kind of thing, that kind of, I should not say it so openly because I'm a scholar and paid for being a scholar, but it's why to make any secret about that? It's truly a very personal kind of job.
Well, I think that's one of the most valuable parts of scholarship is the personal and sort of understanding that. Yeah,
it's pleasure. I don't know if valuable, but it's
and that's, I think, one of the hallmarks of your writing, and this book is what you were saying, kind of pushing it out of bounds. Not necessarily you're pushing as you were following it out of outside of the ready-made narrative and the meta-discourse. That's really quite interesting, and it's not an arbitrary thing. You very carefully construct this. And as you're talking about the time and place and technology.
The period is let's say 1870. It's very vague. It's when modern technologies, new technologies were coming, beginning of telephone and telegraph, and roads were being paved, and there were some optics coming in and so on. And the end is quite sharp. It's 1942, the time when Japanese came and cut the colonial era from one day to another. Again, I feel now quite lucky about that period because it's a late colonial period. And I said I was interviewing old people, and I actually begin to like old people because I realized that maybe it's how you are close to the end and to the death, you articulate much more strongly your view of life and your sensuality and your body movements, everything. And I think something like that is also true about political, social, cultural system. So I like very much the late colonial period in Indonesia because it seems, it's very often retrospective, but you feel that people were sensing it's coming to the end. They were very strong about keeping the things as they are, but they knew it will end somehow. Much more dramatic, actually. It is more than about the Indies, about Indonesia, about the colonial metropole, about the Dutch. Because the Dutch was coming to the end of something in a grandiose way. Holland, for me, you know, like for everybody at the beginning, when you start to learn about some culture, history, whatever, was the golden century, 17th century Rembrandt, and that imperial kind of marvelous culture, and they owned everything. New Amsterdam was little small place they owned, and South Africa and Japan, and even the Dutch culture was truly grandiose and very extremely impressive. But what actually is even more impressive is that decline of the Dutch culture from the 17th to 19th and 20th century. That kind of shrinking, geographical shrinking. There was no more Rembrandt. There were, of course, Van Gogh and other beautiful, marvelous painters, but it was just not that kind of global greatness. And again, like with aging people, with old people, you feel some very pathetic and appealing articulation of culture. These people were talking about Dutchness in much more intense way because they knew something is leaking, something is going away. And Indonesia played great part in that because it used to be Dutch was global empire, Holland was global empire. And then they lost, you know, Napoleonic War and whatever. They were losing one piece of the empire after the other. And there was Suriname, small place in nothing against that, but it's very small place. And there was the Indies, the only thing that was remaining. And when you look at the literature of Holland at the time, the Indonesia was the only thing they could still argue, they could still use, arguing for the greatness. So everybody was terribly attached. Everybody was going there. Everybody was dreaming about going there. Everybody had some blood, Indonesian blood or Japanese blood or whatever, or dreaming about having that blood. So, and it was too big for Holland, that kind of Indonesia. So that beauty of the age close to the end was intensifying general problems, like problems of technology, problems of place and everything.
One of the other things that is always fascinating with your writing is your language and your writing.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, the first chapter, language is asphalt. I mean, what a brilliant concept.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can explain what you meant by that and how you approached that.
I think it's becoming clear when I open my mouth because, you know, there is nothing of aesthetics. There is nothing of beauty. I'm troubled by language. I'm troubled by language personally. Again, it's very personal. Like with that community of scholars, and it's very personal thing. I was born in Prague. I learned Czech. I feel very deeply about Czech language. I wrote about Czech poetry. I think about Czech poetry, and then I came to America, and I have to speak English, and I began to like English. It's a challenge, but I'm always troubled by that translation and transition. The chapter you mentioned is actually about my personal experience at the beginning, that speaking in Czech for me is in a way more difficult because every word has its memory, its atmosphere, and it's like walking under unpaved road because everything is uncertain. I say knee, and I remember when I broke first time and I smell the dirt and I can see face of my mother, whatever. I'm just now making it up. But in English, the words do not have that kind of memory for me. So you can cut them in some shape, and you can pave your way quite easily, or you can make like asphalt. You can cruise. You can go very fast. So I can write English so fast because I actually don't understand what I'm writing about. I'm not controlling myself so much. Well, it's personal, but at the same time, it's professional, I think, because I encountered something like that, even much more dramatic in Indonesia. These people were born in a Javanese context, or Sundanese context, or Malay context, or Balinese context. So they spoke their own languages, which are beautiful, like Czech language. Javanese language is very difficult, very complicated. It's not easy to speak it because it's at several levels, and you have always think to whom you are talking. If you talk down, if you talk up, so it's very hard. And now, especially the generation of that period, if you wanted to enter modernity, if you wanted to go into school, this is the modernity. You went to school. It began with kindergarten. You have to go to Dutch school, of course. There was no Javanese modern school. You have to go to Dutch school. And the stories are truly heartbreaking, because I'm talking to these people who spoke Javanese, and when they were 6 or 5, their father told them, now you start speak Dutch. And the mother was no more mother in Javanese language, but she was mommy, or he was papi, even calling mother, and they were 5 years old children, was suddenly in foreign language. Now, it was a technological thing, because they got perfect textbook. There are no better textbooks of Dutch than in Dutch East Indies. So they got the guide how to do it. They knew rules. They got, like if you get radio today, you get guide how to repair it. It was the same with language. They could do it very well. But the whole life they were trying to remember something, or there was some gap in their memory. So in a way, that situation is very similar. And everything happens in language. For us historians, everything, unfortunately, we are FET snobs like that. Everything, we don't have anything but language to express it. So this is why it was so important for me, that kind of language.
So language is asphalt. The asphalt sort of this thing that covers everything and makes your transportation
my
easy.
metaphor is, I don't know, I talk later with some experts on asphalt, and they say I'm completely wrong. It's not, I disagree. The idea is that asphalt is actually made of some, and now I'm sorry about my terminology even more, some remnants of some meshed animals, of prehistorical animals meshed together into that mass, which is made into very smooth asphalt. And I think about that like meshed memory. There is no living at all. You could not walk on living bodies. It's not, but on asphalt you can cruise very easily because it's dead.
And it covers things.
Yeah, it covers things and it's smooth, and you can cruise easily. Yeah, you can go fast, but evidently something is missing.
What a wonderful metaphor.
Yeah.
It's very striking. And before we go, also you've got the chapter on towers and living spaces. And in this here, when we've been obsessing about the World Trade Towers, that idea of living structures that are high and impressive and imposing and really kind of landmarks was quite fascinating as I reflected on it.
I maybe simplified a little bit, the idea was Indies or Indonesia is a tropical country, and it's also technological problem with that, because we have problems with technology. We are very awkward with technology, but we are very awkward with nature, and it's very similar process. And I'm a little bit uneasy about that, because it looks like romantic thinking about the past. But if you look at architecture of the Indies on 19th, 18th century, 17th century, it's truly open to the nature. It's only air conditioning is a very important thing. You really can handle wind going through the room. You open the windows, and And by letting the atmosphere move, you clean it, you kill the ugly animals by that, because they don't like it either. Mosquitoes do not like the move. It's maybe romantic, but we could not handle it. And Dutch couldn't handle it in 20th century. Their solution was air conditioning. Close the window, close the doors, make the double windows, make the double doors, and put there artificial air. Maybe there was no other solution, but if you look at political situation and so on, it was definitely very logical solution, and it helped in many other ways. So when you look at Dutch living in the Indies, it was socially closing in. The walls were closing in and around the Dutch communities, and then even Indonesian richer communities and wealthy communities. They were closing in, and for that you need a special kind of technology. That end of openness is reflected in architecture.
And the colonizers need to have the environment that they thrive in, regardless of wherever they are.
Yeah.
And they need to protect themselves also in their minds from the indigenous people.
What is sad about it, or what's important to me, not just colonizers, I think modern people. I think, and I'm working, I like to write about colonies, because I think that this is a general problem, just more naked, more clear, more striking. I think we all are like that. We cannot handle nature and so on, and we tend to close in, and we like to take our atmosphere as we go, take it with us, like tourists, you know, which like to go through strange foreign countries but not be touched by them.
Kind of the turtle, we bring our own shells with us.
Yes.
And then when we encounter something, we pull back into it.
Yeah.
One of the other concepts you had was darkness to light.
Mm-hmm.
And all kinds of ways, how they use technology to create this light, and almost excessively, floodlights even.
Yeah. It's again very sad thing. I sometimes have feeling, I hear a beautiful concept, and something happens, and I realize I'm cheated. And I have the feeling that it happened very much in colonies at the end of 19th century, early 20th century, when the modern times were coming, because there is so many metaphor of light and dawn, a new day coming, a new era coming, and so on. But so and many Indonesians were taken by that. They really believe it, and it's hard not to believe. No, dark is dark, and light is something new. There is sun coming, and so on. But very soon you saw how, and this is why I became so interested in optics, that actually in colonialism you need light for something else, to see people distinctly, to watch them, which is the most extreme case. So policing, and it's a great part of the book, watching, policing, seeing them distinct. But again, I think it's a much more general problem, and I am uneasy as, and this is why I wrote for it. It's not there explicitly as a historian. I also want to see these people distinctly. I see them in very sharp light, because I would like to describe them, and maybe I would like to remain in a shadow.
I do want to ask you about the word engineer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the engineer seems like a privileged position of someone who's in a technological culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you also mean that with several different kinds of meanings.
Yeah. They may be Freudish explanation, because my brother is an engineer, so it may be partly that, but it's definitely, it's to me ideal type. It's not nothing which is professional, which has the engineering degree. It's a some quality, and I think by that people who believe like we do very strongly, but who believe that things could be taken apart and put back for the benefits of the thing, that we can handle it like machine. It's a very activist position to the world. There are people without them there will be no modern age probably, because I will never dare to put thing apart and put it back and believe it's the same. Also they have dreams and plans, and I think they think that there is sameness between dreams and plans. For me, dream is very different from plan. Another quality of engineer is that they go through their projects and they believe that they go through that unchanged. Like that kind of strength of personality. I do something, I have a plan, I will do it, and I will end the same man or woman as I was before. Again, they believe it more than anyone of us. So I think this is, also I believe that there is engineer in each of us. We are fighting with ourselves, about that, between that non-engineering and engineering quality in us. There is one kind of engineer, as I say in that book, which can be very dangerous, and this is the engineer who is, Maxim Gorky said, engineers of human souls. And this is the most dangerous kind of engineer who believes that he can improve the soul of his neighbor by that kind of putting together, taking apart, not being changed by that, and so on. So these are the engineers.
Who are so confident, and yet there's these reservations. And then we need to have you explain what Happy Land is.
Happy Land is something where technology is working, where everything is going smooth. When you talk language as Asphalt, when your air conditioning is okay and you don't hear people shouting on the street, maybe shouting down with colonialism or something. So this is the Happy Land.
Well, it is certainly an interesting book, and as you said earlier, in the book you use words with atmospheres, and what a wonderful phrase. It shows your amazing sensitivity to language and the difference between language. But in this conversation, another thing emerged, and that is the struggle with the historian, with narrative and place, and one's own history, and how that interacts in terms of trying to understand the construction. And that was a whole different dimension that I didn't anticipate.
In retrospect, as a real methodologically important book for me.
Well, I think it's a book that has its own aesthetic as a scholarly work, and it's got excellent research. And I'd like to thank you for appearing on Rip Rap.
Thank you.